I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. With 6 days to go until Saturday's referendum, more than 2 million Australians have cast their votes already, including the Prime Minister yesterday in Marickville. The polls might have the no vote well ahead, but neither side is letting up. They're both trying to win over anyone yet to make up their mind about the voice, with multicultural and faith groups a main target in recent days. The contest has also brought out some of the worst elements of society, with elevated levels of racist abuse towards Indigenous Australians. On Thursday, Independent Senator Lidia Thorpe spoke out about the neo-Nazi death threats she's copped. It could be a bruising final stretch to the finish line on Saturday. In a moment, I'll speak to the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. First, let's go to our panel, Dan Bourchier, Katharine Murphy and Peter Van Onselen. Look, let's start with where we're at in the, final week now of the Voice campaign. The polls, as I mentioned, still haven't moved a great deal. They still have the no vote well ahead. Dan, why is that? We're hearing from some of the early voters already over the last week. What are they saying? What are we picking up about why that no vote is so strong?
There are so many people, David, who say they are still confused, that they don't understand what this is about. It's why we've seen a focus from rapper Briggs saying, really Google it and trying to dissect that and understand a little bit of why that is still pervading the views, particularly of younger Australians, when there is so much information out there. And this is, of course, after we have been talking about this in this frame for 15 months, but of course this goes right back to 2017 and a debate that has been happening for decades. Last week I met a young engineer who told me that they had only just realised we're going to a referendum 2 days earlier. And I was completely shocked, and I thought, this guy's having a lend of me. And when I listened to him, he isn't consuming media, isn't on social media, isn't engaging in anywhere that the public debates are happening. And it was really interesting to understand how someone can go through what has been this incredible debate, at times really damaging and hurtful, and yet he has just kind of sailed through and not seen it.
Yeah, and they're the people, I suppose, that the Yes side is putting its hopes on, right? Trying to find those who haven't even been aware that this is happening and win them over. But Katharine, it's clear those who have had a look at it, a lot of them are saying no at the moment. According to the polls, including your own Guardian Essential poll. Why do you think that is? I think it's important to just try and explore why it is where it is.
No, of course. But Dan's point is right. Strangely, it seems odd to us on the couch, and I'm sure to many watchers or viewers of this program, that you can entirely tune these debates out. But I've been away for 6 months, and let me tell you, it is entirely possible to tune these debates out. In terms of why people are saying no, I think the polling shows that people now associate the referendum and the whole conversation around the referendum with division. And for a lot of voters who are very sort of understandably and correctly focused on their material pressures at this point in time, division becomes a barrier to entry in terms of actually grappling with the detail of the voice. It's sort of like conflict. I think from the moment that it was clear that this was not going to be a bipartisan lead up to the referendum, we were in a conflict prism. And I think conflict has been deployed by Peter Dutton and by the No case to be a deliberate barrier to entry for people. But people have clearly absorbed that messaging and that framing. So now we see in our Guardian Essential poll, the sort of biggest turn-off for the no voters is the chief message of the No campaign, which is that this will divide the country. Well,
this is it, isn't it, Pete? The No campaign have really begun with, well, where's the detail? Concerns around the constitutional change and the overreach of the voice, bogging down government and parliament and so on. But they've really landed towards the end of this campaign with that line about division. This is, we're meant to be equal, this is going to divide us. That does seem to be the most potent line they've got.
And presumably they're saying that as a reflection of what their own internal research is telling them is the best message to try to quash the referendum. I mean, we need to remember referendums usually fail. And I think in the goodwill of 12 months ago, or 18 or 24 months ago, people forgot that with where the polling was at then versus where it's at now. Whereas when you look at other referendums, they take a similar pathway to decline more often than not. This just came as a surprise to a lot of, I suppose, insiders because they thought the goodwill would carry it over, the same as 1967. But what's actually happened is there's a natural quotient of people who will always vote no because they either don't understand or they don't want change. Then you've got the small, I would say, quotient of people that have an issue with it because it's an Indigenous issue. Then you add the conflict, you add problems in the Yes campaign. I think it's been a bad campaign by the Yes team, and there has been some commentary on the Yes side, plenty of it on the No side too, but there's been some commentary on the Yes side from Marsha Langton and others that hasn't been well received. And when you put it all together, it just brings a sort of a negative feel that people have decided to let it go. And that's before you get to the arguments that some people run, which is that, well, why can't it be legislated instead of in the Constitution? Will it really change things? It'll create, two classes of Australians. That's before you even get to those arguments, which also push people in that direction. So it would be the biggest polling turn-up in this country if it got up next weekend. 2019 was a polling turn-up, but the polls were heading towards a defeat for the Labor Party, but they didn't quite cross over. Whereas this one's going the other way around.
And we're talking about being out by a few points, not...
Exactly, and that one, 2019, was getting closer, even though right before the poll it suggested that the coalition would lose. This one, the polls are continuing to widen, although people on both the Yes and No camp tell me that in the last couple of days they've seen a slight tightening, but nowhere near enough to make it close. A lot of people are predicting that the Yes vote might only have a 3 in front of it. I think it'll probably have a 4, but it could be a low 4.
We'll see, but it's an interesting point, Dan, isn't it, to look back at where we were soon after the election and the Albanese government coming to power and talking about this referendum and the very high levels of support back then to where we are now.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, the first words the Prime Minister said on the 21st of May in accepting the win was about the Uluru Statement and a pathway to voice, treaty and truth, and that really set the wheels in motion. You and I were both at the Garma Festival on Yolngu Country last year where the Prime Minister detailed that first take at the words, which then went through a parliamentary process. And as PVO says, the goodwill at that point was so high, and what we've seen from then is, well, what happened then is there was a pathway that seemed very clear towards the referendum. And in the frame of this year, we've seen 2 other things happen that I don't think were expected. On one hand, we've seen this tremendous truth-telling from Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people. So I was in Walgett and I met a guy named Victor Beale just while I was there reporting for Four Corners. We just got chatting away and he mentioned something about trust. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And he said, my father was a member of the Stolen Generation. That sits with me and my children. We don't trust police now because of what happened to him all those decades earlier. He said, I'll probably vote yes, but I'm a bit sceptical, but I think something good will come of it. Or when I sat with Auntie Faye Clayton-Mosley, who told me that when she was a member of the Stolen Generation, she was never told that she was loved. And then when she first met her mum, she asked that question. She said, did you ever love me? And so I think as a nation, what we're doing is grappling with the pain and the trauma of the past and the impacts that that has on now. And that's really difficult. And that raises a whole lot of questions about value and who we are as a nation. The other thing that has arisen this year is the extraordinary racism, hate and bigotry that has become ever present everywhere you go in every frame of this debate, that is used as a technique to try and belittle Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to drive a bigger wedge, and to say there's no reason for you to have a voice even in the debate. There is no doubt that that will continue. And what we've seen in this last week, particularly with that video focused on Independent Senator Lidia Thorpe, is utterly chilling.
Well, just on that, I want to just show you a little of her response to it. It's an awful video, and we saw it widely condemned across all sides of politics. But the senator in particular was, well, sheeting home some of the blame to the Prime Minister.
The referendum is an act of genocide against my people. And the Prime Minister knows exactly what he's doing. He wants the fascists to come out and get me. That's what he wants.
Is that fair?
It's just one of the stupidest things I've ever heard, to be perfectly blunt. The idea that she's trying to, firstly link the referendum to genocide, and then secondly somehow suggest that the PM, who wants this to succeed, made it a platform, made it part of his last National Press Club speech as opposition leader, which I thought was the best speech he's ever delivered, and he somehow wants fascists to reign. I mean, it's just, frankly, we shouldn't even air it.
Look, I think it's obviously, I completely agree, it's completely unfair. But I think this is the catch-22 of this whole issue, isn't it? Like, it goes to the heart of it. You know, the Prime Minister has attempted to execute an agenda which the Indigenous leadership in this country have called for. And this debate has been stuck for a couple of decades, and, you know, I will speak very plainly here. It has been stuck for a couple of decades because we've been going around and around on a model that the coalition might be able to support. We've wasted a couple of decades trying to work out what that model might be. Now, the Prime Minister was in a position where he had to make a judgment, like, do I go for this or do I not? And he's made a decision to go for it. History shows that, you know, if referenda are not bipartisan, they don't pass. And obviously, by going for this issue, you open up a conversation and you licence the polarisation and the racism that Dan has very eloquently shared with us this morning. So it is the ultimate catch-22. You're basically trying to move the needle, you're trying to advance a cause that's important to reconciliation and to comity in the country, but, you know, your political opponents stage it as a death match that ricochets back through the community as conflict. Yeah. And here we are, a week before a referendum.
Can we have any debates in this country particularly about, you know, even if it was a symbolic Indigenous recognition in the Constitution, not a voice in the Constitution, you'd still get some of this, wouldn't you? But
that's the point, though, David. Sorry. That's the point. It's sort of like, this is the really kind of gut-wrenching and awful thing about this, is that if we can't have these debates in this country, if we can't try and move the needle in a positive way, then basically we are back pre-civil rights era, where nobody can do anything, nobody can advance anything, no one can have any debate because it upsets other people, or it creates this polarisation in the country, which is frankly dangerous. And so if racism sets the standard for what we can or cannot do in this country, then
we're in a bad place.
We're in a bad place.
Yep. We do have to note, though, that the Yes campaign has been poor. And even if they'd been much better than they are, they still might not have succeeded. It might have been closer, who knows. But a key feature to this failing, assuming that it does next weekend, is that the mainstream didn't come on board because the Yes campaign was messy. And look, picking over those entrails can be something that can happen in a week's time, assuming that's the way it goes. But I don't think that we should sugarcoat that side of it. And that doesn't come home to the Prime Minister. That's the Yes campaign specifically, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also worth noting that we've had, 2.2 million or so Australians voting, a whole lot of postal votes. The bulk of Australians will vote next week. This is probably the week where so many, particularly younger people or those that haven't turned their attention to it, like that fellow, that engineer, will really start to think about what is this. So in a sense, I think this is obviously the make or break week. Every time I've sat on this couch with you, David, throughout this year, I've given a sense of what I'm seeing and hearing in the community. The very first time this year, I talked about that risk of polarisation and of what happens if we can't even have that discussion. Now, I didn't realise then just where we would be now, and I think this is shining a really powerful spotlight on our inability to have conversations that, as the former Chief Justice said about disagreeing respectfully just a couple of days ago. That, of course, is all exacerbated when it comes to questions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs and of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And that is telling us something. It's not saying everything about our nation, but it is telling us a really important story that we are going to need to understand and to grapple with, whatever the outcome is next Saturday.
Yeah, an uneasy story. All right, well, let's go to the Prime Minister. Time to talk to Anthony Albanese. Now, I should note that throughout this referendum campaign, we invited Opposition Leader Peter Dutton onto the program to discuss his position, but he declined. To take us to the Prime Minister, Here was the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians making her case against The Voice.
There are so many incredible Australian stories for those who have migrant backgrounds, those who are connected to the First Peoples of this country, such as myself, those who have convict ancestry. We are all Australian, and that's the point. And that is why getting around and hearing people and speaking to people face to face as though they go in to cast their vote, that they are more determined to vote no to any level of division within our Constitution, but they are saying yes to maintaining equality in Australia. They are saying yes for hope toward the future. They want to see great outcomes for our marginalised Indigenous Australians, but know that this voice is not the way to go.
Prime Minister, welcome to the program.
Good morning, David.
6 days to go until referendum day. What's your level of confidence? Will Australia vote yes?
I'm certainly very hopeful that when Australians focus on what the question is before them, just two things at stake here. One, recognising the fact of our history. It didn't begin in 1788. It goes back 65,000 years. We share this continent with the oldest continuous culture on Earth. That must be a source of great pride. And secondly, a non-binding advisory committee to give advice, to make representations to the government and to the Parliament on matters affecting Indigenous people. And we know that that will produce better outcomes, because if you look at the programs that have been most effective in community health, justice reinvestment, Indigenous Rangers programs, they all have that sense of ownership, and with that as well, importantly, will come responsibility for the outcomes. So you'll get better efficiency. This is a very fiscally conservative position here, David, which is why a range of people like Chris Kenny have been pointing that out for a long period of time.
So you said you're hopeful, though. Will you honestly be surprised if Australia votes no?
No, I'm optimistic. What I see on the ground, whether it's in Wangaratta or whether it be Shepparton or Sydney or Brisbane, Melbourne, the places I've been, Hobart, Adelaide in the last week, have been extremely positive. The feedback is that when people have those conversations, they are willing to vote yes. I think most Australians are generous people. They know that there's a gap, an 8-year life expectancy gap, a greater chance of an Indigenous young male going to jail than a university. We can't keep doing things the same way. We need to do things better, and that starts with listening.
Why do you think so many are saying no?
Well, the history of referendums in this country is 8 out of 44 have been successful. It's really easy to go out there and talk about no. We just heard the Indigenous Affairs spokesperson for the Coalition. One wonders why there's an Indigenous Affairs spokesperson if we don't want to listen and have some special programs focused on Indigenous people. So we know that the confusion, which has been a deliberate strategy of the No campaign, we've had quite frankly, some absurd debates about whether the Indigenous voice will be advising the Reserve Bank about interest rates. We've had a debate over how long the Uluru Statement from the Heart is. That is all a conscious decision to wreck and to confuse.
So you think no voters are just confused or being misled?
I think that the leadership of Peter Dutton, or the failure to really show leadership, when he made the decision after the Aston by-election to say no, he is arguing, of course, to have a second referendum if he's elected, but he's also arguing to legislate the voice. So the difference here is whether the voice can be abolished or not. That's the only difference.
Yeah, and we'll come to that, but I'm just trying to get to why you think people are saying no to this. You mentioned the Shadow Minister. How influential do you think Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price has been?
Well, I think the whole No campaign, backed up by the media. We have a front page story today, David, about a so-called survey, and I looked for some facts, a company, some figures, and there's nothing there. There has been no survey, but it makes the front page of the paper. So people are getting all of this information to them. They're being told that it's complex. what I would say to people, to your listeners who haven't made up their mind, and what I'll continue to say over the next 6 days, is to have a look at what the question is, because it's very clear. It's simply us, in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia, and then 3 points. There shall be a body, the voice. It may make representations on matters affecting Indigenous people, and the primacy of the Parliament. This doesn't change any of the ways in which we are governed.
But my question was really about Jacinta Price and how influential she's been as an Indigenous woman from Alice Springs saying, vote no, because this is going to divide us.
Well, of course, that has been a factor, the fact that there is not a homogenous view amongst Indigenous Australians. But what we know is that as we speak here, the Central Land Council, made up of 90 elected delegates from all throughout those communities, covering tens of thousands of kilometres in Central Australia, are all absolutely united in supporting a yes vote, as is every land council in the Northern Territory, as are the 56 separate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups who are a part of the Coalition of Peaks, as are more than 1,000 doctors, as are representative groups of Indigenous communities right around the country.
The argument that we were talking about this earlier does seem to be potent, is this one of division. Jacinta Price is saying this divides us on race. Now, you've previously called such an argument the great lie.
Because there is race powers now in our Constitution. And what this is about is Indigenous issues, not a race. So that is what this is about. Every other former colony in the world, which was a former colony of the British or someone else, has recognised its first peoples in its founding document. New Zealand did it in the 19th century.
But if this change
in the 20th.
gives only Indigenous Australians a special body in the Constitution that others don't have, does that add to division?
No, what it does is allow them to be listened to. Recognise the special relationship with 65,000 years of connection to land and waters gives to Indigenous Australians. It recognises, just as the Mabo decision did, their prior ownership of the land here.
So is Jacinta Price lying to Australians?
No, look, Jacinta Price has put her views, and it's up to her to do that. But what has occurred here...
You've called it the great lie.
Well, because it is not true. It is not true to say this is divisive. This is an opportunity to bring the country together. And when I was on Thursday morning with all of the faith leaders, Catholics, Maronites, Anglicans, Baptists, Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, all of this broad group all coming together, the Jewish community, all coming together, it was a moment of unity. It showed to me what the country can be. Our great multicultural success story here, and that's been the latest chapter in the Australian story.
Given that, I mean, you've talked about how the world will be watching this vote, how Australia will be seen as a mature country, able to be honest about its history if we vote yes. What's at stake here? How will Australia be viewed if we vote no?
Well, a vote for yes is a vote to show respect to Indigenous Australians. But it's also an opportunity for non-Indigenous Australians to lift that burden up, to acknowledge the fullness of our history. But it also, of course, will be seen by the world. It was something that the G20 were very conscious, international leaders, of the fact that we are having this referendum, because other countries have gone through it much earlier.
And you're saying they were keen to see Australia vote yes?
Well, Australia is last in the queue when it comes to acknowledging the fullness and richness of our history.
So if we vote no, how are we viewed internationally?
Well, I think that we will go out there and explain the position, but...
It'll hurt us, is that your view?
My main focus... Well, I think that quite clearly Australia is being watched at this time in terms of the referendum for how we're perceived. And it will be seen as an uplifting moment. It will be seen that Australia has come to terms with our history, that we're a mature nation
But will we
that
be
can
diminished?
recognise...
Will we be diminished if we vote no?
Well, I'm hoping we vote yes.
But I'm asking what...
I'm hoping we vote yes, because the debate here is whether Australia will enlarge ourselves, whether we're a country that looks for hope and optimism and for the future, or whether we shrink in on ourselves.
I want to ask you what happens after Saturday. If there is, as all the polls indicate, a no vote, what will you do about tackling Indigenous disadvantage?
Well, we're already undertaking measures, but in my view, it won't be as effective as having a body, a voice to be listened to. But we'll continue to do things like we're replacing the remote jobs program with a program for employment that actually creates real jobs with real wages. We'll continue to invest in justice reinvestment, looking at programs like Burke that work effectively. We'll continue to invest in community health. But what a voice will do is provide for an opportunity for us to replicate the success stories. There are success stories out there. Success stories are where Indigenous kids are going to school, where health programs are being improved. And we saw during the pandemic, David, at its peak, I mean, I was briefed about the potential catastrophic consequences for Indigenous communities that were occurring at the early stages there, with low vaccination rates, with low knowledge. It was only when the bureaucrats went out to the community and listened to the community that was turned around,
So
and much more effective programs being implemented.
So if Australians say they don't want it in the Constitution, surely then you would still legislate the voice, set it up in law.
No, what we've done here, David, is respect the request for Indigenous Australians for recognition in the form that they have asked for it through the Uluru Statement, all of which occurred under the former coalition government. But we will also respect the response of Australians next Saturday.
What does that mean?
It means that if Australians vote no, I don't believe that it would be appropriate to then go and say, oh, well, you've had your say, but we're going to legislate anyway. So what we will do is respect the outcome of the referendum.
But I don't quite understand that, because if it's going to deliver all these benefits, and in fact, let me play this. This is some of your colleagues, your ministers, arguing all the good things that a voice can achieve. Have a look.
The voice is about better outcomes. It's about better value for money, and that makes it good economic policy as well.
If we listen and come to better decisions and get better results and have more young Indigenous men going to university than to jail, then it's going to be better for them, it'll be better for their community, and it'll be better for Australian taxpayers.
We'll shift the dial in suicide rates, which are twice as high for young Indigenous Australians as for non-Indigenous Australians.
So benefits for health and education and the economy, surely you wouldn't just walk away from it, you'd set it up in law.
What you do when we're talking about the voice is listening. And Indigenous Australians have said they want a voice that's enshrined. What they don't want to do is what they've done time and time again, which is to be a part of establishing representative organisations only to see, for opportunistic reasons, a government to come in and just abolish it. Right. All of that social capital, if you like, that investment of their heart and soul, which has been ripped away so many times. And that's what this referendum is about. It is about listening. And if a voice is about listening to Indigenous Australians, we need to listen to the gracious request that they have made.
Okay, and if it's a no vote, you walk away from the voice altogether?
Correct. We will continue to do what we can to listen to Indigenous Australians. We try that now. But Indigenous Australians are saying that they want it to be enshrined.
And what do you do about reconciliation? Where does a no vote leave reconciliation in Australia? Are you worried about that?
Oh, of course I'm concerned about that. And I think that the reconciliation journey, which the Uluru Statement so eloquently speaks, it speaks about walking together to a better future. And for 122 years, we have done things, often with the best of intentions. We've done things to or for Indigenous Australians. What we're saying and Indigenous Australians are doing is wanting things done with them. And this would be a setback for reconciliation then, wouldn't it? If Australians vote no, do you have any sort of thoughts going on in the back of your head? How am I going to deal with this? Well, I'm focused on success next Saturday because I believe this will be really important. And I think when Australians do focus in the next 6 days, and we know that more than 1 in 4 are yet to make up their mind, what this is a handout of friendship. And when I came to the studio here in Canberra this morning, the first thing that we did was shake hands. That's what you do. This is a handout from the first Australians asking non-Indigenous Australia just to join with them in something that is a very modest request, a non-binding advisory committee to give advice, make representations to government, and then it's up to Parliament and government to decide whether it accepts that advice or not. But after 122 years, that is not too much to ask. And as Paul Kelly is singing, and as I said at Gama, if not now, when? When will we get around to constitutional recognition of the first Australians? Peter Dutton says he's going to have another referendum, but this is a guy who walked out on the apology because he found it so offensive that it would have such dire consequences. Guess what? It didn't. Okay. He was wrong then, which is why he apologised, and he's wrong now. And a yes vote will be an important step towards reconciliation in this country. We'll see what happens on Saturday. Just quickly on a few other things, PM, what's happening in Israel, in the Middle East right now. Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, says his country is at war after this major incursion from Hamas fighters. For Australia's part, what is your view of what we're witnessing happen there at the moment? Well, this is an abhorrent attack on Israel. This is indiscriminate. Civilians being targeted, killed and murdered, and as well, many of them being taken as hostages. This is a dreadful circumstance that people didn't see coming, wasn't foreshadowed, a shock attack. I spoke to the Israeli ambassador to Australia who's in Israel this morning, and he, of course, was very shaken, as you would expect. And this action is ongoing. It must stop. Israel has a right to defend itself, which is what it is doing. Are you worried about escalation here? Would you be urging any restraint? Well, of course people are worried about escalation, but Israel has a right to defend itself, and it will be doing so. This is an attack on Israel by Hamas that has no precedent for what is occurring here. Are you aware of any Australians being caught up in the violence? The advice that I have at this point in time is that all Australians are safe. There are, of course, ADF personnel as well, Australian Defence Force personnel in the region. And at this point in time, the advice as of this morning is that no Australians are caught up. But of course, it's incomplete advice. This has been a very dark 24 hours. I want to also ask you about Ukraine, because we've seen in Washington over the last week or so this growing number of Republicans who want to wind back support for Ukraine. The future now of US support appears to be somewhat in limbo after the ousting of the House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. Is this concerning you? Well, support for Ukraine is support for democracy and support for the international rule of law. It's something that President Biden has been very strong on, and the Australian government is strong on as well, and has been a bipartisan position here. This is a struggle to defend the rights of a sovereign state to exist, to defend the rights of a democracy to exist. And the Russian illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine has reminded us as well that this action has led to increased prices here in Australia and has had drastic human, environmental, social and economic
So your
consequences.
support's unwavering?
Our support is totally unwavering.
You urge the US to stand
of
firm
the people of Ukraine, and I know that President Biden and the United States will continue to stand strong.
And I've got to ask you about this apparent conversation between Donald Trump and Anthony Pratt about nuclear submarines. I'm not so much interested in your view of what they might have discussed, but we know Donald Trump is on trial for alleged mishandling of documents. Would you trust him with national security secrets?
I don't discuss security issues for the United States.
I'm asking whether you trust Donald Trump.
I tend not to discuss. I am not going to get into US security issues. Not only that, David, I'd be unlikely to discuss Australian security intelligence issues on insiders as well. It's a good idea
Would you trust
to not do so.
Would you trust him?
To not do so. Look, I work very closely with President Biden. Who the United States elects as president is a matter for the people of the United States, and I will respect, as we do, democratic outcomes wherever they occur.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.
Well, we are going to look into this conversation between Donald Trump and Anthony Pratt in a moment. They were apparently talking about the capabilities of the US nuclear submarines. We're going to start, though, or return to this issue around the voice and some of what we've just heard from the Prime Minister. Back to our panel. We're joined once again by Dan Bourchier, Katharine Murphy and Peter Van Onselen. Dan, that seemed to me the strongest. We've heard the Prime Minister say that if there's a no vote, there's no voice. Definitely not in legislation.
I think what was pretty clear from that is that the Prime Minister's not even thinking about Sunday at this stage. All the focus is about Saturday, this final run. We know that at the mentioned before that last year on election night, the Prime Minister said the delivery of the Uluru Statement in full, which is voice, treaty, makarata and truth. So how that plays out, I think, will be ongoing conversations from next week and in the weeks and months ahead. I think what the Prime Minister was really doing there was calling for Australians to look into the information. He made the point there a number of times about the focus of the Uluru Statement, of the simplicity of the words after that political process and what that means going forward, of course, for this vote and the way the Prime Minister put that there about this being something called for by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Yeah,
they certainly are saying they want it in the Constitution. They want this put up at a referendum, and they've not retreated from that.
Yeah, but he's in a catch-22, David, because he should legislate a voice, even if it fails in a policy sense, no doubt, as per all of his ministers
all the
who
arguments,
played.
yeah.
But if he then says, I'm going to do that, he'll also be accused by critics of going against the will of what the people, how the people voted in the referendum. So he is in a catch-22.
Well, we've got to remember the Liberals want to legislate at least local and regional voices.
But he would be criticised either way. I do think he's made the wrong decision, though, because I think that the right thing to do would be to legislate it in the aftermath of a defeat, despite the criticism that he'll receive. The only thing I would say, though, is publicly, over and over again, he kept saying, I'm focused on a win rather than on what happens on Sunday. I can assure you, his team would be nothing but focused on what's going to happen come Sunday in the aftermath of
That's
defeat.
going to be really tricky, right? Whether it's trying to heal the nation after what we were talking about, the tone of this debate and where it's gone, whether it's charting a course forward on reconciliation or indeed tackling Indigenous disadvantage, closing the gap, all of these things. You can hear him, Katharine, starting to flesh out now a little bit about without the voice, we're still going to be doing this, we're going to be spending more here. So that plan B, in fact, before I hear from you, let me just show you Noel Pearson's comments during the week on 3AW, where he basically said, without the voice, there is no plan B.
There is no plan B. Mate, I've been at this for 30 years, working on these problems from the ground up, and I'm telling you that there is no plan B. No will be a disaster for all of us. We will all lose, including the no campaigners. We will lose. If we vote yes, we'll all win, including the no campaigners.
Prime Minister has to have a plan B, though, doesn't he, Katharine?
Well, yes, obviously he does, and given that there will be inevitably a history war break out about what happened and who made the wrong mistake when and all of that.
The draft legislation have helped, or all of these.
You know, like that will be sort of sonic boom level, the history war that will sort of accompany this. And obviously, you know, there will be commentary written about that this is, you know, that the failure of the voice is a proxy for the Prime Minister's, you know, political fortunes going on. You know, a vote against the voice is a vote against Anthony Albanese. You know, look, we could all write the script now.
Meanwhile, actually fixing some of these problems.
No, exactly. Well, I think, look, the short version is obviously the government is going to need some hard propulsion out of the result, assuming it's a no, if it is a no. And dare we say an act of leadership will be required in terms of resetting on this issue and many others. But the sort of conundrum that the Prime Minister faces, I think, is that part of the reason people haven't focused on the voice is because they are very focused on other issues. So I wouldn't be surprised if the hard propulsion out of the voice involved the Prime Minister focusing on a bunch of other
Totally
issues.
agree with
Look, a few other things just on that. They have been busy in the last few weeks with various announcements to show this isn't the only game in town. And the past week's been migration, trying to fix some of the problems in the system, whether it's human trafficking, bringing in people on tourist or student visas simply to work in low-paid jobs through dodgy colleges, and also people making asylum claims when they're failing those claims, basically staying here to work. Murph, what have they announced, and is it substantial? Is it going to fix these problems?
Yeah, it's sort of what they've announced is an attempt to fix these problems, although it's a very complicated problem to fix because there's a very big pipeline of people that have to be attended to. I mean, you've described the circumstances, obviously, David, that there's a bunch of people who are in Australia, they are making refugee claims either legitimately or in order to extend their runway in the country, because if you appeal your status for several years, obviously you're permitted to stay here longer, work longer, etc. You know, they're going to sort of chew at the pipeline from both ends, but prioritise the front bit of the pipeline to try and sort of deal with the backlog. And there's money for, you know, sort of integrity of processing migration agents, other things. Look, is it a magic bullet? Nope. Will it help a bit? I would think so. Resourcing something and prioritising something is generally better than
more judges and more members of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal to process these claims faster.
Didn't they cut the number of people on the Administrative Appeals Tribunal after they got into government?
Rebranding the whole tribunal.
There's more
anyway,
now.
But along the way, apart from policy steps, a lot of this was the politics, I reckon, during the week. It was about trying to really pin a lot of the blame around what's happened here on Peter Dutton as Home Affairs Minister. Claire O'Neill, the new minister, you know, really ripped into him at every turn, and it led to this rather personal exchange.
She's a very angry person, always very angry and very aggressive, and the negativity coming out of Claire O'Neill today and the overstated position that she's taken, frankly, is all about trying to provide cover for a bad Prime Minister.
I noticed Peter Dutton came out and made some very personal attacks on me yesterday, and I would just say there are really serious issues here. Everyone in our country seems to be able to see that except for him. And what I'd say is, you know, play the ball, not the woman.
Play the ball, not the woman, PVO.
Well, I mean, there's a few things in this. I mean, she went him personally, but then she's offended when he went her personally. I still don't think he should have done it because he's the leader of the opposition. Ministers can be deployed that way.
Were they gendered comments too? The sort of...
Well, it sounded gendered. I mean, I have to say, I don't think he meant it that way, but it certainly came across that way. The problem for Peter Dutton is that he's not really in a position to be able to accuse other people of being too negative. and that is a difficulty for him. And I say that having written a column for the weekend slamming Claire O'Neill in the context of her announcements, because I think there's a bit of hypocrisy here on the Labor side with the way they're now championing this, with how it might have impacted some of their early decision-making after they got into government.
I think, can I say that? I think that it was absolutely gendered when you say that the woman minister is, angry and very aggressive. I can't remember a time where that was said about a bloke, a male minister that made a similar decision or was taking aim at another politician. And I think probably the reason for that comment was quite deliberate, to say, so that everyone is talking about that, and the fact that the opposition leader didn't respond to the substantive points that Claire O'Neill was making about what you did when you were the minister for that time, and what is the genesis of the challenge that we have now, and this pipeline issue that Murph was talking about. That wasn't discussed. It was about this comment, and I think that was a very deliberate approach.
Just quickly, Donald Trump and Anthony Pratt talking nuclear submarines, and then blabbing, apparently, Anthony Pratt to, what was it, 45 people about some of these nuclear submarines?
Three former prime ministers, yeah.
I think Trump's denied it, but Anthony Albanese won't go into whether he'd trust Donald Trump. But
this is the least of Donald Trump's problems.
You're probably right. You're probably right. But this predated the AUKUS deal, so I don't know if it has ramifications for what's now happening. But also, we just need to get some thoughts on what's happening in Israel. PM obviously very concerned about, everyone's very concerned about where this might go, the escalation, well, what's already happened over the last 24 hours.
Look, this is really serious. This is, firstly, from an Israeli perspective, this is their biggest security failure of intelligence since the Yom Kippur War, which is almost to the day 50 years ago. Does this mean, firstly, it also would mean that there's a collapse, you would think, instantly in the Saudi-Israeli peace pact talks that they've had? Yeah. Does it have contagion in the region? Hamas is calling for organisations like Hezbollah to get involved as well. Does that happen? And the other issue is the Israeli response will be different. Normally, they look to degrade Hamas when there's, terrorist incidents. In this instance, they will now look to go after their leadership, you would think. This is war, as opposed to what they term, it's a terrible term, but they call it mowing the lawn when they try to deal with challenges of a security nature. This is much more serious than that. This will result in an attempt to do more than degrade, but to destroy Hamas, and it is nothing but an escalation.
This is very...
And that's before talking about the individuals. It's not just soldiers that have been captured. Individuals are elderly, children, you name it.
All right, we've got to move on. Our panel, Peter Van Onselen, Katharine Murphy and Dan Bourchier, will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with my colleague from The Guardian, the one and only Fiona Katauskus, and a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Mike. It's kind of lovely to be here in these grim times. Nice to be here with you.
The referendum's only a week away, but it doesn't seem like Australia's talking in one voice. There are many voices.
Yes, from many different angles.
Yeah. Megan Herbert's got looking through no-coloured glasses, or should I say nose-coloured glasses.
Yes, exactly.
It's a really lovely look at it, that there is an element that's come out in this that's attached itself to the no vote that is pretty unsavoury.
Well, I definitely don't think this means war, but truth has been one of the first casualties, that's for sure.
Let's hear it from someone who knows how to come from behind, and the Penrith Panthers genius here, Nathan Cleary.
Yeah. Oh, he's in a league of his own, although not really, because a whole lot of other sports people have come out and keep coming out in support of The Voice. So, we'll see.
The choice is Cleary. Johannes Leek is worried about the Prime Minister's voice. Hey, Albo, how's The Voice going?
A bit on the horse side, actually.
Political football, it's probably all the naysayers.
Yes.
Kathy Wilcox has looked a little bit forward to the fact that we may be waking up on the 15th with a no vote. The headlines are Voice referendum divisive, Uluru statement declares war, no historic trauma to fix. Polls show no vote leading, and the lady says...
Oh, well, I suppose we can always make another apology.
Sorry again.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah. John Kadelka, he's got a very big billboard here outside Uluru. Here is a no-effort, zero-risk opportunity to be on the right side of history.
No.
From the referendum to the Royal Commission, after 4.5 years of investigation and 222 recommendations, the Royal Commission on Disability has come down with some findings.
It has, and they're very serious findings indeed. It should be a big wake-up call to everyone in Australia.
You've given the too hard basket a workout lately, I've noticed.
Yeah, well, there's not only a too hard basket. We've got producing a Royal Commission report is the easy bit. The hard part is keeping it out of these. You've got the too hard basket, the too expensive basket, and the too little political will. And yeah, unfortunately, a lot of Royal Commissions end up going into those.
They could have them outside Parliament House, like the big too hard basket.
Yeah, and how long would that take to fill, Mike? Like that'd be, they'd put it up, it'd be full straight away.
The RBA governor may have piqued our interest, but she didn't raise it.
No, and I think probably for Michelle Bullock, she's had the best debut because no one's talking about it. If you're the Reserve Bank governor and you're a household name, that's a bad thing.
David Pope's got the temperature check here as he's got Michelle Bullock reading a digital temperature check on a little teeny piece of hot snow shovel here. I'm afraid we're still picking up persistent pockets of economic overheating.
God, he's so good, David Pope. He's just got her face so beautifully captured.
John Spooner has got Queen Canute here sitting on her throne. You Canute, be serious,
Yes.
pushing back the waters here of oil price rises, energy price rises, rising import costs and mass immigration.
Yeah, well, yes, it's...
inflation.
It's not a tide that can be turned back with blunt instruments, I don't think. I think, yeah, these rising sea levels, we'll have to see how they go. A collective sigh of relief over the rate freeze, but who knows, Reserve Banks move in mysterious ways.
Look, Fiona, it's been a great pleasure unpicking the events this week, even though they've been pretty grim. I'll let you do the honours.
Thanks, Mike, and back to you, David.
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. PVO.
Next weekend, the voice will go down, possibly in every state. In the aftermath of that, what the Prime Minister should do is appoint Australia's first Indigenous Governor-General. Unfortunately, Pat Dodson, who would be absolutely perfect, is ill, but nonetheless, there are plenty of other very excellent Indigenous leaders, and that should be part of the process in the aftermath of a defeat of the referendum.
Interesting idea, Murph.
Just because there's a week to go, people are, if they don't have the context for why we're having this conversation, if you don't have the information, please find the information. But also, if you don't have the context, I just really strongly recommend David Marr's new book, Killing for Country, which I'm about 3/4 of the way through. It's a proper history. It's kind of stunning in all the awful ways, but it tells you a really important bit of history and context for the conversation we're having now.
All right. Dan.
We know that security is being ramped up across this last week for many of the Indigenous politicians, particularly the women leading these charges. I think that's very chilling. As we head towards next week, a lot of focus on the politics of what's after. I want to focus on the people, and I think that we're going to need to do, regardless of the outcome at this point, a tremendous amount of soul-searching and work to try and heal some of the damage that has emerged throughout this year, and I think that's going to be incumbent on all of Australians. Picking up on PVO's point about perhaps a Governor-General could help to lead that. I think that's part of it, but I actually think everyone needs to be on this same journey, and this is where leadership and listening is going to be really, really crucial from everyone.
Well said. Thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Next week we will have a special extended edition of Insiders as we digest the results of the referendum on Sunday morning, so I hope you can join us for that. Finally, with the Cricket World Cup underway, we have another entry to the Prime Ministerial Cricketing Hall of Fame. Anthony Albanese scored a few runs with Toto by his side for a charity match on the lawns of Kirribilli House the other day, but it was his drop catch that will be remembered alongside some of the classic contributions from his predecessors. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
I just can't bowl that. That's all.
Prime Minister.
Oh, it's up in the air. Getting up to Nathan. Riley, oh, the Prime Minister. Riley had it. The Prime Minister called her out and said, you're a hopeless catcher. I will take it.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.